Sales conversations are one of the fastest ways for you to be able to drive results and get more sales and revenue in your business. But it's not just any sales conversations, it's the right sales conversations that move people to take action and actually say yes. So, in this episode, I'm going to share with you how I doubled my conversions using a simple but effective DM strategy in my business. And I'm Naza Echeverria. I've taught thousands of experts how to scale profitable and sustainable businesses by getting leads to sell themselves using the Netflix effect. And today I'm going to show you how I doubled conversions using this DM demand strategy that I'm sharing with you here today. Now, you know that DM conversations equal more booked calls for your high ticket program, but you don't want to spend all of your time in the DMs giving free coaching or answering questions. And you don't want your team to have to spend all this time when it's not actually moving the needle. You want it to be strategic because strategic sales conversations will allow you to build a bridge between content and conversions. So people getting on your calendar are pre sold and eager to buy. So let's get real.
Three, two, one.
Welcome to the Business Real Talk podcast, where you'll learn straightforward and simple ways to scale your business, and we're keeping it real. I'm your host, Naza Echeverria, an 18-year marketing expert and the founder of Next Level Up CEO and the Easy Yes Method. I'm also a wife, a mom of three, and a real talk strategist. On the Business Real Talk podcast, we'll dive into how you can disrupt your industry, create a pipeline of premium clients, and how to scale your revenue without scaling your time. If you're ready to dive straight into how you can use my Easy Yes method, I want to invite you to check out my free mini series that breaks down how you can replace all of your sales and marketing efforts with just one Netflix-inspired client acquisition system that turns cold leads into raving fans in 7 days. Go check it out at easyesleads.com. I want you to leave this podcast with business strategies that are straightforward and timeless. So let's get real. In order to understand how to effectively use DM conversations as a part of your sales strategy, we have to understand what actually makes an effective DM sales strategy. So, in last week's episode, we talked all about how we use just 4 pieces of content to add 100K in revenue a month without launches. Now, you heard me talk about why this works so well. And it's that we're using our content to set people up to make decisions. The reality is, your intent behind your actions is ultimately going to drive your results. Everything we do and everything we teach our clients centers around the intent for purchasing decisions. This matters because what this means is that the content we create is built to set people up for that. Our DM strategy is meant to help people to move to that decision, and our sales calls are meant to help people make that decision to say yes as easy as possible. Foundationally, that's the premise behind how and why our leads say yes faster than the industry average, because we've optimized our entire strategy for that exact intention. Now, there's 3 levels of decision making, and understanding those levels and how each of those builds upon the next is ultimately what's going to make your DM strategy make sales or make work for you. Now, what I want you to understand is that your content is meant to create interest demand. That means you're getting people excited enough to take that next step and be curious and intrigued and wanting to know more. Your DMs play the role of turning that interest into buying demand. And ultimately, your sales calls are what convert that demand into paying clients. Now, understanding this means that it shifts the entire process of the role your DM strategy plays in that process. And that's why we leverage our DM strategy in 2 different ways to drive more and faster conversions. The first is to turn that interest into buying demand. So I shared with you that one of the key functions is that we understand that we are creating inbound demand. So I want to clarify that for you, okay? We want inbound interest. When we look at DM conversations, we specifically are speaking to and developing inbound interest. This is an important differentiator in the strategy behind DMs because outbound focuses on using your DM conversation to try and create interest, and then focus on the sales conversation to create demand and convert demand. It's an extremely exhaustive way of growing and scaling a business. It's kind of like the bro marketing equivalent to having a calendar filled with appointments with the idea that this is going to lead to more conversions. But you know, that's not how we operate here. We take a holistic approach to scaling, and each piece in the client acquisition process is building upon each other in order to do that. So, just like a car, when you think about it, we look at the car, we turn the key, or we push to start, and we think the car turns on, right? But just like a car where the ignition switch is activated by turning that key or pushing the button, it's going to activate the next step, right? It's going to create a voltage from the battery that then produces an engine spark, igniting the fuel and getting the car to start and run. I need you to understand that, because similarly, your entire client acquisition process, from the content we're creating to the DM strategy that we have and the sales call that we're running, is ultimately you understand that each piece is actually moving the next one. So it's not about looking at one singular piece, even though that right now we are talking about your DM strategy. I want you to ultimately understand it's understanding how all of those pieces work together to turn the car on. Okay. So your content is what's creating the spark. I want to be clear about that, because when we speak to our DM strategy, we're operating from the standpoint that we're not sending out a cold DM trying to create interest. We're not outbounding our DMs in order to create interest. Our content is creating the spark. It's creating inbound demand where somebody is saying, "Yes, I'd like more." Okay. That is a very key factor. I want you to understand. I hope this is making sense, because without that first piece of the puzzle, then the DM strategy we're going to share here today does not make sense. So ultimately, if you haven't already, go back and listen to the episode from last week where we talk about the content strategy, because our content strategy is ultimately setting people up to create inbound demand. So by the time our content is doing that, so in our case, I'll give you the example that we've either created a belief shifting piece of content, or we've run a two-step, or we have one piece in that puzzle that's getting people to say, "Yes, I want more." When they say, "Yes, I want more," that inbound interest is now being met with our DM strategy. Our DM strategy is taking that inbound interest and it's using that to turn that spark from the content into fuel. So, whether you or your team are managing those DM conversations, understanding that intention and what's driving that initial result is ultimately what's going to set you up for more conversion. So I want you to walk away from right now where we're at here in this point. I want you to understand our goal is that our content is creating inbound interest. Our DM strategy is turning that inbound interest into a buying demand. Because here's what I want you to understand. Having KPIs for how many DM conversations you or your team are having is ultimately not going to be a clear indicator of how successful those DM conversations are. So often you've been told to start 10 DM conversations or send 10 messages, right? You've been told these things before, or you've been taught to quantifiably look at how many DM conversations your team is having within your business. And the goal behind that, again, is that we're looking at it from a numerical standpoint. And while I absolutely agree that we want to know the data, what I also want you to acknowledge and recognize is that it's not just about how many conversations. It's more about, are those DM conversations creating demand? Because 100 conversations that are only leading to 2 booked calls is a slow way to scale. Versus if I have 10 demand based conversations, ones that have come through people who have already created that interest demand, that's going to lead to 5 booked calls with pre sold leads. I want you to understand the difference in that. So, what that ultimately means is I'm not interested in you just having tons of DM conversations. I'm interested in you having the right strategic DM conversations that are built from having interest demand from your content and then converting that into buying demand. So, in this case, the question becomes, what needs to happen so that my DMs are focused on getting people to want to work with you? And in just a second, I'm going to show you exactly how we do this through our 3-step process. But I want you to walk away from this first part of the process for you to acknowledge and recognize My content should be creating interest demand. My DM should be creating buying demand. My sales calls should actually be converting that demand into paying clients. If you're not doing that currently, that is identifying for you where your gap is. Means if our conversations, our DM conversations are not coming with interest demand already in hand, your content, your marketing, your messaging needs work. But if you have gotten to the point where you have people coming in saying, yes, I want more, whether that means they're commenting on your content or they're sending you a message saying, I'd like more, whether that's more information, access to the training, to that next step, then you have now created interest demand. Want to confirm that. You want to acknowledge, do I have interest demand or do I not? Okay. Understanding that. And I'm going with the acknowledgement that you've created interest demand. And now what's happening is our gap becomes, how do I leverage DM conversations to support people into creating buying demand prior to the sales call? So when people say to me, my sales calls are long or exhausting, or I'm working with people, or I'm speaking to people who are unqualified or unready, that tells me that both your content did not work effectively to acknowledge and understand that, and then your DM conversations did not work effectively to do that. Ultimately, when I tell you that I am getting on sales calls, my clients are getting on sales calls with people who are saying yes before they even open their mouth, it's because we've built a system. We have developed a system where every piece of the car, right? Everything is firing together to produce the result. So, understanding that, I want to acknowledge the second way we use DM conversations, and that's to catch what we call sideline leads to help speed up the conversion process with what I call reactive selling. So, we all have those people, lurkers, right? I call them sideline leads. Now, what happens is people that enter your world, they're consuming your content, they're seemingly so close to buying, but they don't actually pull the trigger. Now, what we want to know is understanding how to strategically use DM conversations to kind of catch those sideline leads so you can speed up the conversion process is the best and fastest ways to reduce lead churn and get more people saying yes. So recently on one of our group calls, we had a chat about what role that DM conversation plays on the other side once someone's already in your audience, okay? What we really looked at is that we want to have a safety net. We don't want to be fully reliant on just one thing doing all the heavy lifting. So, just like we mentioned in a car or even like in a flywheel, the pieces are working together to get that to move. Okay. I want you to hear and understand that our DM conversations are able to support and move people who haven't been moved directly just through your content. So, if you're someone who's like, my content's working, but it's not pre-selling the best way that it possibly can. And I know I need to like better support that. An easy way to do this is reactive selling. So think of it this way. Lurkers are currently leads that have not been activated to buy. There's some missing piece that's left them on the sidelines. So right now, you may be putting out stellar content, but those leads aren't moving. There's something missing. And you might be asking yourself or thinking to yourself, forget it, these leads are just not buying, but they are. The problem is you haven't actually activated their specific buying trigger. And I've said this many times before, and we've ran an entire episode talking about buying triggers. So make sure you check that out if you haven't already. But people buy for different reasons. This is so shocking to me that so many people don't acknowledge this because when you understand that people buy for different reasons, you now realize that understanding and addressing those different reasons is the key indicator of converting more leads. So, the example I use over and over again, and I'll share with you here, is that the reason somebody buys Nike shoes is going to look different. So, I always say that the reason I buy Nike shoes is because I think they're going to make me run faster. The reason my daughter buys Nike shoes is because she's in seventh grade and she thinks it's a status symbol and people will think she's cool. The reason my son buys Nike shoes is because he knows that he wears through his shoes a lot and Nike provides that wearability where we're not constantly going through new shoes. Those are all different buying triggers. I want you to hear that. I want you to understand that because that is so important in our entire growth strategy to acknowledge those different reasons. Said differently, some people join my Sustainable Profit Academy, my high touch mastermind, because they want to automate their lead conversion process and they need something that's going to give them the highest conversions for those high intent leads, aka They know that webinars and challenges and 4-minute VSLs fail them. They are focused on actually pre-selling and automating conversions where leads can sell themselves. So they come to me for Sustainable Profit Academy for that. But I also have some people who join Sustainable Profit Academy because the delivery of their program is sucking them dry and they need a better way to get their clients to get incredible results without needing to always be on or being dependent upon them answering DMs and being a part of constant calls trying to solve the problems. And other people might join because they're tired of competing for attention. Their ads are getting expensive. They're tired of becoming a content machine and they've paid their dues and they now want to be known, seen, and paid as the industry innovator that they are. The solution remains the same. My easy yes method applied inside of my Sustainable Profit Academy. But the triggers, the reasons that somebody is going to buy and make a buying decision to work with me are going to look different. Now, our content system actively finds and addresses these triggers, but what we're talking about when we say we're looking at a layered approach, our DM conversations are that safety net that also allow us to do this in a more immediate fashion. So rather than us waiting till next week to create a specific angle that we're speaking to, our DMs can jump in and identify and address that trigger individually. This becomes incredibly important when we understand that people are buying at their own pace. So if I have a high intent lead enter my world and my content system or my sales system hasn't addressed their specific needs, my DM system absolutely is going to pick up where that left off. It is going to identify their trigger, speak to that trigger, and really be able to solve for that trigger. So the right DM strategy will give your leads that space to share their unique buying triggers, their needs, their fears, their desires, so that you're able to address them easily and powerfully. Reactive selling is now where you're able to react those unique needs that people have, those unique buying triggers that they have in the moment. You're reacting to those needs. What this allows you to do is it gives you the ability to make that decision making process so freaking easy because you've alleviated the fears, you've addressed their unique needs and desires. They no longer have to wonder or question if you are the right fit for them. So they can say yes so freaking quickly without any hesitation whatsoever. So say goodbye to longtime lurkers when you have a DM strategy that reactively supports their needs, reactively selling in that process. So now that you understand the intent behind those DM conversations in our inbound approach, it's time to talk about the formula behind what it actually takes to double conversions and sales with a simple DM strategy. So I call this our Ravenous DM strategy. Why? Because the goal is that by the time someone has gone through your DM process, it is setting up your leads to be ravenous for your solution. So by the time that you've taken them through that DM strategy, they should be ravenous, chomping at the bit, asking for that next step because you have created that buying demand. So the three things we need to be able to accomplish within this ravenous DM strategy is number one, what we call asking the right questions that are going to ultimately help you identify their current and future state. So let's talk about what this means and why that's so important. So I want you to understand why we ask the current state question, because knowing and understanding that is ultimately going to drive how you create that conversion within that process. So when we know and acknowledge their current state, we know where their starting point is, which means that we're now better suited to position the conversation and build that pathway to where they want to be. So everyone's unique. The better we understand the details of their unique pathway, the better we can paint a picture of the road to their resolution, which is ultimately what we're doing in the DM conversation, creating buying demand. So, a great example of a current state question would be if you're an anxiety coach who supports people in overcoming anxiety, you would ask, how do you currently treat your anxiety? We want to understand current state. Okay. The second part within that asking the right questions is knowing their future state. So I'm going to give you an example of that as well, but I want you to recognize and acknowledge knowing their future state will ultimately allow us to understand their desires and motivation, that reasoning behind solving the problem. Why is this important? Because solving a problem, like I just want to solve my anxiety alone, is not an indicator of intent, but desire is. Reason is someone can absolutely want to solve a problem, but have zero intent to actually do it. So I can say, yes, my anxiety is frustrating. Yes, I should want to solve this problem, but I don't actually have the intention to do it because it's not a priority. But when we have defined that state of desire, they've now put the wheels in motion. They're already making an active decision that solving that problem is absolutely top of mind and an outcome that they are currently after. So, an example of me asking the right question for future state would be, what would healing your anxiety allow you to accomplish? Their response to this is ultimately allowing me to understand their intent. And understanding their intent is what's going to drive the next piece of the process. So, that first step is asking the right questions and knowing how to acknowledge their current state and their future state. Now, the second step in the Ravenous DM strategy is identifying the gap. Now, in order to understand how we play a role in their outcome, we need to understand what they believe to be true and what they're currently and actively trying to resolve. So, the way that I kind of paraphrase this is we want to know what their current activity state is. So, we talked about this last time, talking about how we understand an intent triangle. One of the things we need to know is their intent, right? The other thing we need to know is what's their current action state? What are they currently doing? So, the way that I ask this question is, what do you think needs to happen in order for you to finally heal your anxiety? I'm asking a question that allows them to self diagnose what needs to happen. Why is this so important and probably the linchpin in successfully being able to convert DM conversations? Because it's actually helping us identify what they believe they need to do in order to get the outcome they want. This means I now know what they're attempting to accomplish or what they're attempting to do in order to accomplish what they want. And it's helping me identify how to position myself to step in and create a belief shift and give them the aha clarity that they're after, all while positioning me as an expert. Okay. So, in me asking that question and their response to that, I am not only being able to be putting myself into the position of sharing how I am the authority, but I'm also identifying how to shift a belief. Okay. Which leads us to our third and final piece of the puzzle, which is positioning, how we're positioning the solution. So the everything I've talked about up until this point has set the tone for you to understand the role that our DM strategy plays within the process. The questions that we ask, the intent behind what we're doing. We're wanting people to make a decision that yes, this is the solution I need. So by the end of a DM conversation, they should be thinking, "Oh my gosh, this is what I need." Understanding that the questions I've asked so far, the gap that I've identified is ultimately setting me up to position where and how to speak to this. It's where we bring all of the pieces together. So we've asked the questions that have given us the framing for how their unique pathway looks like, what they need to do in order to achieve that. We've identified the gap, and now comes where we get to come in and fill it. It's where I say that you become the knight in shining armor who saves the day. So we're creating a belief shift that moves from the gap we've identified to the real problem and then positions your innovative and often unconventional approach to resolving the real problem. So, a great example of this is oftentimes when we are going through our DM strategy with clients, we ask them what they believe is the missing piece for them to be able to sign more premium clients in their business. And so often we'll hear that, oh, I just need more leads. Okay. That is the thing they are attempting to fix and what they believe to be true to getting the result that they want. Now, what we're able to do is leverage that understanding to bridge the gap and give them the clarity that acknowledges that we are the expert and that we resolve the problem in an unconventional, innovative way while letting them understand why what they've been doing hasn't worked. So, in this case, when someone says, "Oh, I just feel like I need more leads," I would come in and say, "Oh my gosh, I can totally understand that." So often people think that they just need more leads to get more premium clients in their business. But the reality is, it's not about getting more leads. It's about getting the right leads, high intent leads, the people who want to make buying decisions, and then having a conversion process that sets them up to make the fastest and easiest decision possible. That's why our decision based approach focuses on getting people to make decisions quickly by speaking to the right people at the right time with the right system. I'd love to share more about what this looks like. This is ultimately taking all the pieces of the puzzle that we have acknowledged and understood and bringing them together. From that, people are now seeing the clarity that they have, seeing that I have now diagnosed and acknowledged a problem they didn't know existed, and allowing me to position the next steps with them, which ultimately leads to us now being able to plug our methodology as a way to solve this problem. It's so simple when you really see all the pieces come together. But so often I see people that don't understand how that part of the process works. Now, there's obviously nuances, things like how to reply in between. We use what we call an empathetic echo, or how to keep the conversation moving and how to reactively sell in that process based on their hesitations and questions. But each step in the DM process is building upon the next. Okay. And we, of course, go into complete detail, not just on how to handle DM conversations, but how to optimize their content and their messaging and their sales calls inside of our programs. But for here and now, I want you to understand that. So we are now taking the initial interest, we're converting that to the buying demand within that DM conversation. So by the end of positioning, we have now turned them into ravenous buyers, which means that we now can position our next step, such as a call, as a way to feed that insatiable demand that we've created. No more hesitations, no long drawn out DM conversations where you're getting friend zoned and you and your team are spending all your time trying to convince, just easy yeses, excited and eager leads, which means shorter and higher converting sales calls because your leads are pre sold. This is the power behind the Easy Yes method and why it works together as the systematic approach to easy yeses. So, the first step within our Easy Yes method is actually identifying your innovative approach because ultimately, in order to really get all of the additional parts moving, we need to understand how you bring something to the table that nobody else can. This is ultimately what's going to drive demand in your business, what's going to allow you to create a market of one and be able to ultimately have people saying yes without any hesitation. We do this by helping our clients develop what we call innovative gap methodology. This allows us to identify the biggest and unserved gaps in within your market and how you can actually resolve that using your innovative approach. You walk away with an innovative approach that has people chomping at the bit, ready to work with you because they know you are the only solution to their problems, while you're charging 5 to 10 times more and they're happily saying yes. The second step in the process is actually automating that entire process. So, everything we've talked about up until this point has talked about how we use the DM strategy within this process. But ultimately, what we want to be able to do is have an automated approach to actually getting our leads to be able to say yes without needing us to handhold them every step of the way. So, our bingeable sales system steps in to help us actually speak to those high intent leads and create a high intent system that meets them in their decision making process. Simply put, we use a bingeable process that uses just 5 videos that specifically answers their unique and individualized buying triggers and moves them through an automated process while also creating a second layer system that allows us to meet those leads who weren't ready to make a buying decision by addressing those individualized buying triggers and using our DM strategy to be able to reactively move those leads through the process, reducing lead churn and getting more leads through your pipeline saying yes without needing to spend more on expensive ads or show up in all of the places. Now, the third and final step is how we actually solve for the problem that we've made a promise to. This is what I call our pure profit strategy because ultimately, having a delivery system that allows you to stop constantly being on means that not only are you able to better serve your clients and actually have a life, but it's also creating raving fans and people who are happily sharing about your method with anyone who will listen, creating pure profit in your business and less marketing necessary. This is the power behind the EasyS method and why 416 of our clients are raving fans and have been able to leverage this to get their leads to sell themselves using the Netflix effect. And as always, I'm going to invite you to the next step because I practice what I preach. And my goal here is ultimately to move you to the next step in making that powerful decision that allows you to take control of your success and create a system that sells for you. So, if you're ready to learn how we do this and how we can apply this to your business specifically, I want to invite you to what we call a growth optimization call. On this call, you and I will sit down, we'll look at your current process. I'll show you exactly where the biggest opportunities are for optimizing and scaling this so that you can create a business that has a client acquisition that gets leads to sell themselves. You can book your call now directly with me over at easyesleads.com/call. But if you want to learn a little bit more about how the EasyS method works and how this Netflix effect actually gets leads to sell themselves, I want to invite you to check out our bingeable selling system and our bingeable mini series. You can check that out now and binge your way through our system over at easyesleads.com. But as always, we love and appreciate when you rate, subscribe, and share this episode with a friend so we can help take this to the masses and get their leads to sell themselves. But until next time, here's to keeping it real. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Business Real Talk podcast. If you're serious about accelerating your growth, doubling or tripling your revenue, and going from the best kept secret to the only and incomparable solution in your industry, then be the first to listen to each episode by hitting subscribe and sharing with a friend. Be sure to follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Next Level Up CEO to learn more about how you can declutter your marketing and leverage the easy yes method in your business to focus on results and create a truly scalable and sustainable business that doesn't suck up all of your time. To get a sneak peek at my proprietary methodology that has allowed my clients to double or triple their revenue, go check out my free mini-series that shows you exactly how you can replace all of your sales and marketing efforts with just one organic and evergreen client acquisition system that brings in premium clients on repeat. Go to easyesleads.com to access the mini-series now. And as always, stay tuned for next week's episode on the Business Real Talk. Until then, keep it real.